Hey guys, welcome to the channel Gente Commando. My name's Ryan and I'm a former Royal Marine from the United Kingdom, and guess what? We're reacting today the British America's War of 1812, explained in 13 minutes apparently. So let's get into this one, guys. But before we do, please like, share, subscribe to the channel. You know the drill already. If you're brand new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and everyone turn on the notifications. Yeah, if you want to support the channel a little bit more, then you can become a member. Press the membership link in the description, or press the join button, guys. But let's get straight into this one. Thanks for being here.
In 1812, the young nation of the United States took on the country with the most powerful navy in the world in a war that would affect more than just the former colonies and their colonizer. The United States of America first gained freedom from the British in an 8-year-long Revolutionary War that finally came to a close when Britain inevitably recognized the independence of their 13 former colonies on September 3rd, 1783. One of the most relevant impacts of this war that would fuel future tensions between the US and Britain once again was the role of the Native Americans. And as a fan of our channel, you should check out our friends over at CuriosityStream. This is my personal favorite streaming service, a place where I can watch thousands of more about the impressive history of the United States and the United Kingdom at 20 only. Sign up. During the Revolution, the Native Americans mostly supported the Brits, who they hoped would continue to restrict expansion from the US settlers into Native American territory. When Britain failed to maintain its rule over the colonies, the United States eventually accelerated its takeover of native land, causing even more friction between the American societies. This friction only grew stronger as the years went on, as Britain remained a driving force of the discord, since not only had the natives taken its side in the Revolution, but the British also openly encouraged the Native Americans to fight back against their antagonists. By 1812,
So I didn't know that we actually, supported the Native Americans in trying to obviously stop you guys fighting back. So the actual Britain got the Native Americans on their side to fight against. Wow, that's pretty impressive. I mean, these guys were warriors as well. They were natural born warriors, the Native Americans, and still are to this day, really. What's your thoughts on Native Americans then? From what little knowledge I've got, they're still under the kind of persecution today as they were way back when. Some say they are.
This, combined with a few other factors, led to the development of a new war. While the United States was clearly unhappy with the united opposition from Britain and the natives, they were also infuriated by allegations that the Royal Navy was utilizing a tactic known as impressment to take US men for their own troops.
Wow.
On top of this, the ongoing strife between Britain and France had a notable impact on the United States.
This is one thing that never really gets brought up by the Americans. I've found it does get brought up by the Brits, obviously, because we got our asses kicked. The French intervened in that an awful lot, and in my opinion, they were the overriding reason that we actually lost over there. That's my opinion, though. What do you think?
Heavily locked in their own struggle, the warring nations tried to restrict trade from neutral countries and punish anyone who attempted to ignore the constraints. This put the United States in a detrimental position due to their inability to continue trade with either nation unless they wanted to risk invoking the wrath of the other side. While France took a more laid-back approach to ensure the US abstained from doing business with the British, the latter was more aggressive about the matter. On January 7th, 1807, Britain issued an order in council stating, "It is hereby ordered that no vessel shall be permitted to trade from one port to another, both which ports shall belong to or be in the possession of France or her allies, or shall be so far under their control as the British vessels may not freely trade." Furthermore, any ships that refused to obey these restrictions would be subject to seizure by the Royal Navy, cargo and all. well. By November, the original order was expanded, now to include all the ports and places of France and her allies, or of any other country at war with His Majesty, and all other ports or places in Europe, from which, although not at war with His Majesty, the British flag is excluded, and all ports or places in the colonies belonging to His Majesty's enemies. In retaliation, France, under the command of Napoleon Bonaparte, issued the Milan Decree, which said that every ship, to whatever nation it may belong, that shall have submitted to be searched by an English ship or to a voyage to England, or shall have paid any tax whatsoever to the English government, is thereby, and for that alone, declared to be denationalized, to have forfeited the protection of its king, and to have become English property.
What?
Adding on,
Hang
Napoleon
on, so
declared...
you can't just come up with something like that. He's basically saying, this is ridiculous. That is actually ridiculous. Good old Napoleon, eh?
That any of the aforementioned ships that enter French ports or those of French allies are good and lawful prizes of his nation. Forced to reply, U.S. President Thomas Jefferson signed the Embargo Act in December of 1807, blocking all international trade from American ports and taking direct aim at Britain. Unfortunately for America, the act backfired and turned the U.S. into more of a victim than anyone else. Emphasizing this point, the Minister to France himself even said, "Here it is not felt, and in England it is forgotten." The effects of the Embargo Act ultimately pushed the US into an economic depression, and it had to be...
You know, I think that England at the time just had too much baggage. They had too much going on around the world, especially with France, man. France really did mess it up. I mean, in many ways, it's good what happened. Really, you know, we have great ties now as the United States of America and as Great Britain. But just looking back in history, I think France really did mess it up for Britain. You know, honestly, what's your thoughts on that? Drop a comment.
Repealed less than 2 years after the initial signature. In its place, the Non-Intercourse Act was passed, which directly forbade
Non-Intercourse Act?
trade with Britain and France and...
Okay, I thought they were going to be forbidding something else there between the nations. I didn't know if that was such a rife problem, but obviously it's trade instead.
Their colonies. When this new act still proved to be ineffective, the United States tried once again, this time passing Macon's Bill No. 2 in May of 1810. This bill lifted trading bans and stated that if either France or Britain removed their own restrictions, the US would re-establish an embargo with the opposing nation. By August, Napoleon enacted a plan to exacerbate tension between Britain and the United States, and it ultimately worked. He first told the new president, James Madison, that he intended to exempt the US from his previously established Berlin and Milan decrees, promoting Madison to bring back the Non-Intercourse Act constraints against Britain in November of that year. Despite the fact that Napoleon never actually followed through on his proclamation, Britain and the United States were now on the brink of all-out war.
Yes.
The final straw came when the Battle of Tippecanoe unfolded in late 1811, as the U.S. troops claimed victory over the Native Americans, wishing to stop further expansion once again. Given
Now, just imagine this on both sides. Yeah, you're the US on the left there, Native Americans on the right with axes, bows, and stuff like that. What's more petrifying? Someone coming towards you with modern weapon systems, where, you know, guns must have been petrifying for the Native Americans. You can press a trigger and a round comes out that could blow your head off. That must have been petrifying for them. But on the same side, the Americans, what must it have been like with these guys coming in on horseback with no tops on, axes, bows, swords, that kind of thing? It must have been, I can't even, how do you even fight against someone like that? Obviously you've got a weapon, but back then, you know, the muskets and stuff that they were using and the other rifles, it took quite a while to reload. So I don't know which one I'd rather have. Maybe both.
The United States was fairly confident in the belief that the British were supplying the natives with weapons from Canada, a faction of the US Republican Party known as the War Hawks.
Ah, so that was just an illustration there, so not necessarily a true illustration. According to that, they were actually getting weapon systems from the British indirect, so yeah, that's me being a bit naive, actually.
Began a heavy push towards an official declaration of war. At last, on June 18, 1812, President James Madison signed the declaration against Britain, despite contention about the issue coming from both the House and Senate. Another problem emerged as well when Britain decided to suddenly repeal their trade restrictions before news of the US declaration of war actually reached the British over a month later. Aware of this delay, Britain decided not to immediately respond to the call of war and waited to see how the Americans would react to their repeals when the US...
It's pretty amazing though, isn't it? Like how small the United Kingdom is. So I live like halfway up that country and it takes about 6 hours to travel down to the very bottom edge. And you know how much power we actually had back then. It's to be admired. I don't care what country you're from. It's like, you know, we kind of paved the way for a lot of modern day countries. You know, in the United States of America was included in that as well. I think, although there was a lot of war, a lot of killing involved, and things didn't necessarily go our way all the time, it definitely paved the way. And it's a fantastic history we've got, both of our countries.
Got wind of this surprising development, they were in turn unsure of how the Brits would react to their declaration of war. Ultimately, the United States decided to follow through on its proclamation and did so by invading Canada, which was a British colony at the time. While the American troops hoped to capture Canadian land to force Britain into negotiation, they had no such success. No one was prepared for war. The British and French have been busy fighting their own battles, and the US military was grossly ill-suited to take on the likes of Britain. The defeats were plenty and humiliating for the Americans. One excessively humbling loss for the US happened when General William Hull surrendered Fort Detroit on August 16, 1812, and his own army to the British troops, and allowed Michigan territory to be deemed as part of Britain. Chased across the Canadian border, as Hull saw the size of his opponent's forces, which was a mix of British and Native American troops, and knowing that his daughter and grandchild were in the fort, he decided to give up without a single shot being fired. Hull's disgraceful failure...
I mean, when it comes to family, who knows what your actions can be? You're going to protect them at all costs, regardless of the repercussions. And in this case, not even a single shot was fired. He didn't really give a damn, to be quite honest. And I don't know, I'd like to think I'd sit on the same fence as him. Where would you sit? Would you do the same thing for your family?
Led to an uptick in Native American raids in the Northwest and British conflict under the command of Major General Henry Proctor. Adding insult to injury, U.S. Brigadier General Henry Dearborn struggled to make any progress on the northeastern border because the militias in New England were not supportive of the war and uninterested in coming together for an attack on Montreal. By October, the Americans were finally able to get some momentum as Major General Stephen von Rensselaer led an army of 3,100 militiamen into the Battle of Queenston Heights. Rensselaer sent some advanced units across the river where they were able to hold their ground for some time on a slope just above...
I'll tell you something, guys, I'm glad in a way I'm born in the generation I am. I mean, imagine fighting in battle then. Just in an extended line with your weapon systems and swords, just going literally face to face with the enemy, guaranteed to go face to face. Hideous beyond belief.
Of Queenston, and were successful until they were overcome by British forces as the rest of the American troops refused to join the fight. 925 U.S. soldiers were then captured by the British, despite Major General Isaac Brock on the British side being killed during the battle.
Whoa,
Yet again, the Americans took another hit in 1813 when an attempt to retake Detroit resulted in a massacre of U.S. prisoners by their Native American opponents.
So at the moment, it looks like the United Kingdom is kicking ass big time. But where it goes from there, I'm not too sure because I'm not very good at history, to be honest with you. But I guess we'll find out. But the way it normally goes, The UK kicks ass, something happens elsewhere, America kicks our ass back. That's how it seems to go.
On top of that, Brigadier General Henry Dearborn was replaced by Major General James Wilkins. At long last, though, in September of 1813, U.S. Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry scored a major naval victory at Lake Erie against the forces of British Captain Robert Barclay and opened the gates for more success on the American side. When the Battle of the Thames erupted the following month, the U.S. finally defeated the British and Native American allied forces. The next spring season, at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, a U.S. militia force faced off with a Native American force known as the Red Sticks and found victory once again, demanding that the losing side cede roughly 23 million acres of land, which would later become Alabama and span partially into Georgia. Another win for the United States followed in the summer, July of 1814, at the Battle of Chippewa, but it was short-lived, as the Battle of Lundy's Lane ended in a bloody stalemate shortly after, forcing the Americans to withdraw. The real deciding factor in the war came when Napoleon faced his first exile, allowing Britain to shift more focus to the discord with the United States. The British sliced through the US, destroying government buildings, including the White House, as they took control of Washington, D.C.
Yeah, there's a lot of rumors that go about in the British military, actually, and this is interesting for you Americans, of who actually was responsible for burning down the White House. There's local, there's certain battalions, certain regiments, certain units want to state the claim of that. Now, I was always led to believe that it was the Royal Marines that did it under the direction of a naval officer. But there's some people believe it to be. I've even heard this, that the Scottish Argylls were responsible. Then I did a little bit of digging, and it was definitely under the command of a naval officer with different parts of the British military. So I guess there's an element of truth to both of those. All right, there'll have probably been Royal Marines, there'll have probably been soldiers from other regiments. But yeah, that's quite a state of claim, really. There's a lot of people quite proud of that fact over in Great Britain. So it's probably something you guys don't realise.
The Brits then tried to push farther into Baltimore by September under the authority of General Robert Ross, but were repulsed at the Battle of North Point, where General Ross was killed. In the battle that inspired the U.S. national anthem, more British troops were fought off at Fort McHenry. As these conflicts raged on, peace talks began in Ghent and eventually resulted in a signed treaty on December 24th, 1814. Still, just as with the declaration of war, the news was delayed and took until February 18, 1815 to officially be ratified and end the war.
Wow.
The Treaty of Ghent reverted things back mostly to how they were before the combat, with a status quo antebellum. All territory was returned. Britain repealed their trade restrictions, stopped supporting the Native American revolts, and ended their impressment strategies. In the end, the war was essentially a draw, and the only real losing side was the Native Americans, who had high hopes for British help in stopping US expansion. Britain was able to claim victory against the French, and in a way, against the US. Meanwhile, the US had the pride of more or less winning their second war of independence.
Well, fair play to those guys. Brits thought we won. You guys thought you won. I guess the real winners it has to be the United States, really, because look at them now. They're still doing really well. We tried our best, guys, but we failed miserably. But that's just the way it goes in war. And it's sad, really, that the Native Americans are the ones who picked up more bruises than anyone within that. And I don't know. I kind of feel as if they still are to this day. Yeah, it's a tricky subject, that one. I don't know if I'm wanting to kind of go in depth about it. I might actually do a video reacting to something on that. If you want to see that, please drop a comment below, guys. But if you did like this video, you made it this far, like, share, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, turn on the notifications. And just want to say thank you for supporting the channel, guys. If you want to support the channel even further, then consider becoming a member. Just press the join button. If you don't see that, click the link in the description. But I'll see you in the next one, guys. Peace.